Hi, this is David. I recently went car shopping. Not my favorite activity, but I thought I would share this spreadsheet that I built that tries to compare a lease to a purchase with the motivation really to show that the lease can be compared, and you want to ask two questions that you would still ask on a purchase. You don't want to forget those just because it's a lease. There's a common tendency the dealership to focus you only on the monthly payment in the lease, and it's easy for them to do that because it's always going to be less than the purchase. But that doesn't mean you can't overpay. In the case of just to show the comparison then, I'm going to assume that our car has an MSRP of $27,000. The MSRP isn't that important, except in the case of a lease, there is a residual, so I'm going to assume 60%. And the residual gets multiplied by the MSRP to give us the price of the car at the end of the lease term. So in this example, that is $16,200. Now, for either a lease or a purchase, what is important is the agreed upon price. So I'm assuming we've gone in, negotiated an agreed upon price of $25,000. It should be lower than the MSRP, and hopefully it's as close to the invoice price as you can get it. And I would recommend TrueCar.com for being competitive on that. For example, I managed to get a price that was just a little bit above invoice, so I thought that was a pretty good deal. Then the contract will have several line items. I've collapsed them to keep that simple. I've assumed here there's some fees that drive that up, some adjustments that maybe drive it down, like a rebate. So you can see my positive 800 nets against a negative 800 here. So that's a wash. There's going to be a down payment, probably, not necessarily. I'm going to assume we're putting $1,000 down under either case. So you can see so far the lease versus purchase scenario is similar. We definitely have an agreed upon price in both cases. And in our example, we're going to put $1,000 down, so that we have a price for the car here after the down payment of $24,000 under either case. Now, in the case of a lease, they call that an adjusted capitalized cost. But again, you want to make sure you know that number. In the case of a purchase, this is a difference. The tax will be applied right here at that price. So the $24,000, in my example, I'm assuming a tax of 9%. That varies, of course. So that's going to bring our amount borrowed in the purchase up to $26,160. Okay, so both of these we're going to assume have a term of 3 years or 36 months. And then we get to the interest rate, and our purchase here has 2.952% as an assumption. In the case of a lease, this is oftentimes hidden in the money factor. I'm surprised it still works after all these years in some cases, but with the money factor, that could be something like 0.00123, and you'll notice here, all I do is multiply that by 24 to get the interest rate. So that's my second tip. Even in the case of a lease, you don't want to overpay with a rate that's not competitive. So you want to find that money factor, multiply it by 24 or 2400, depending on the decimal formatting here, to find out what your interest rate is. You can see here I've equalized these at just under 3% for the interest rate. So you can see that even in the case of lease, I've got the same two tips that we have on a purchase. You want to know the agreed upon price, and you want that to be as low as possible. And you definitely want to know what your effective interest rate is by taking the money factor and multiplying it by 24. In the case of a lease, the depreciation is going to be the difference between the cost and the residual up here. In this case, that happens to be $7,800, difference between our adjusted cost and our residual. And that depreciation gets spread out over all 36 payments. So you can see here that's almost $217. Then the interest component is a function of our interest rate. So each lease payment has a depreciation component. So that's where you're paying down on the depreciation over the 36 months, and an interest rate component. And then this 266, we haven't taxed it yet, so the tax then occurs monthly. Here is the 9% that adds almost $24 to the monthly payment and gets us here a monthly lease payment of just over $290. Compared to the purchase, which has a principal and interest component on the monthly payment. Remember, we've already taxed it here, but really we're depreciating the entire value of the car over the 36 months. So instead of a depreciation and interest, it's really principal and principal on the loan and interest on the loan. And so that amortizes down to zero. So each month there's more principal than interest, but it's varying slightly, although the monthly payment is the same. But you can see here, and that's why I haven't broken that out, because it actually varies as it amortizes. But you can see here, in the case of the purchase, this works out to $760 a month, which is a lot more than the lease. It's about $470 more than the lease. Why is that? Well, the big difference here is if we go this purchase route over the 36 months, at the end of 36 months, we've paid off the loan. We own the car free and clear. So the entire value of the car, as opposed to if we lease for 36 months, we then have the option to purchase the car at the residual amount of $16,200. So you can see how far we are. We're a long way from fully owning that car, and we have the option to pay for it at the residual or just give the car back. And so actually this $470 per month extra that we're paying under purchase, if we multiplied that out by the 36 months, we get about $17,000. So we get pretty close to the residual. So you can sort of see roughly, I'm not counting for time value of money, that the difference here is really covers pretty much this whole residual. So the big difference here is that the purchase buys us the entire car, so to speak, over 36 months, as opposed to the lease. We're really renting it for the 36 months, and then we have the option to purchase on the residual. So, but my point in this video was to really divide those two things. The lease versus purchase decision has some other factors associated with it, but you really can separate that from the idea that under either case, there is a price that we're negotiating for the car that we want to be as low as possible. And in both cases, there's an interest rate that we're paying. And the easiest thing we can do is get both of those things as low as possible and then confront this decision about lease versus purchase. So this is David Harper, the Bionic Turtle, and I hope that was helpful. Thanks.